again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, hazardous weather graphic not showing quite as much as what we had going on yesterday with the winter storm warning ending here for St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait coast, although still pretty windy there, but right around Tin City, right through the strait, strongest winds going this afternoon, a little bit up here around Point Hope, but otherwise the advisories and warnings have ended here along the northwest coast as well, and also for the central Arctic coast, winter weather advisory has ended as well, but continues here for the western Arctic coast, let's see, until about, through 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, Tuesday afternoon. Winter weather advisory there. East winds will continue to gust to 30 miles an hour, and some areas could see a little bit higher gusts than that, but about 30, now create blowing snow, which still could reduce visibility to less than a half mile at times. Otherwise, pretty good around the remainder of the state. The other area is a snow advisory here, and that's out until 9 p.m. this evening for northern panhandle areas there, mostly the Klondike Highway, Haines, and especially the Haines Highway there and the Chilkat Bridge area, and that's out until 9 p.m. and looking for a total snowfall 4 to 6 inches. Of course, less around Haines itself, downtown Haines, 1 to 2 inches there, and 4 to 6 the higher elevations you go to maybe as much as 11 inches total. That's mostly, I believe, over toward the border there, and Skagway not included. They may pick up 1 to 2 inches, and that's about it. Otherwise, mostly in the form of rain here over the remainder of the southeast coast. Hey, looking at satellite today, you can see low pressure here pulling northward right off the coast, another low pulling west-northwest and across the Barren Islands, spreading some clouds and kind of a localized area of heavier precipitation over the southern Kenai Peninsula during the day today. Northwest flow around that, clearing it out over Kodiak Island. Otherwise, heaviest rainfall with this system, where the heaviest clouds are here over the central and southern southeast coast, lighter amounts up to the north, and areas of clouds up around Arctic Village there, the eastern Brooks Range, and kind of just some loose clouds over the interior areas, and a little bit of moisture right through here, but snowfall amounts pretty light. Cold upper level low sliding southwestward here. This is kind of the leading edge of the bona fide Arctic air coming down with the below zero temperatures moving south of St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise still in the 20s, say for the Pribilofs there, with some light snow going on both at St. Paul and St. George today. Down here, the next system, pretty good cloud shield associated with that. That's going to be the low center off the chart here, but that'll be sliding east-northeastward. You can see early on, back here to the west, whole mass of moisture coming northward, maybe some light, or maybe some precipitation getting in the central Aleutians this afternoon, but the bulk of the moisture is still to the south. Will stay to the south, and that whole thing will track up to the northeast, south of the eastern Aleutians, also south of the Alaska Peninsula, and then pull up just near Sitkinak Island, begin to slow down over the next couple of days. On the chart today, trough brought snow showers out over the western Aleutian areas, a little bit of a break here through the eastern Aleutians, low pressure pulling westward into Bristol Bay, weak low there with some snow showers, Alaska Peninsula, into the Pribilofs, light snow areas, light snow and snow showers all the way up across the western interior, western North Slope, Brooks Range, all the way out to the Arctic coast. Snow and blowing snow continues, but improving though, winds lightening up. It's still seeing gusts to about 51 miles per hour at Tin City this afternoon and about 40 to 50 miles an hour at Point Hope. Otherwise, other locations seeing much lighter winds now, and dry central interior today, basically dry over the Cook Inlet area. Return flow or northwest flow clearing it out across Kodiak Island, especially the east side of the island at the state airport, carried clear skies this afternoon there. That moisture getting blown back out into the Pacific there. And this low coming slowly north and northwest. First trough there gave some, again, that snowfall. Southern Kenai Peninsula, Seldovia picked up anywhere from 3 to 5 inches of snow in the Seldovia area there. And wet snow falling in Homer, temperatures in the lower to mid 30s there. Several inches falling falling there. Heavier probably in the higher elevations, southern Kenai Peninsula. And then breezy conditions, winds basically gusting 30 to 40, maybe 45 miles an hour here along the north coast. Heaviest precipitation down to the south today. Ketchikan picking up 1.8 inches of rainfall there, while Craig had about 1.5 inches. Petersburg picking up 1/2 inch. By contrast, Juneau only had 1/100th of an inch during the day today. And again, dry over the central and southern interior Copper River Basin, just some isolated showers over here in the 40-mile country. And for actually looking at the Fairbanks 3-day forecast here, Wednesday, not too bad actually all week. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday about the same, variably cloudy, some sun breaks during the sun up periods. Lows a little below zero, but not too far, staying warmer than -10, and highs a little above zero there with light winds, so pretty good conditions up there in the Tanana Valley for the entire week. Now moving on to tonight's forecast, this front weakens right along the coast, low pressure drifting west-northwest here, weakens as well, so rain and snow showers, pretty light though for the Prince William Sound North Gulf Coast area, over to about Yakutat, and lighter precipitation, still wet but lighter there for the Panhandle, and then some light snow over the eastern interior as well as the western interior, mostly dry in the central part of the state, and then this system here sliding northeastward, that bringing increasing wind and snow to the eastern Aleutians, and late tonight toward the Alaska Peninsula, snow showers continue over the central Bering Sea areas back into the southwest coast, so some areas of snow with that moisture, leftover moisture associated with this weakening trough there, that first low pressure area kind of holding that pattern in place, and that extends all the way up to the western Arctic coast. Another weak system there. Moving on to tomorrow. See that low comes onto the chart now, moving northeastward, but south of the Alaska Peninsula, so that's going to be bringing that moisture in over the colder air at the surface, so periods of snow for the eastern Aleutians. Rain and snow south side of the Alaska Peninsula, chance of snow on the Bering Sea side. Snow showers continue. Really no change out here for the Bering Sea. Wind's not all that bad. Still northeasterlies, north and northeasterlies, but not all that strong. That gradient supports something maybe 15, 25 miles an hour. Even lighter winds here along the Aleutians with snow showers, and areas of snow showers of this weak trough there over the western interior down to about, well, southwest interior looking pretty dry. Chance of some snow showers possibly in the afternoon. Cook Inlet up into Susitna, Matanuska Valley, and rain or snow showers along the North Gulf Coast with some rain and snow here with this trough. Southwest flow continues, keeps a wet pattern in over the Panhandle, and that'll continue. This front here we'll see on the next day. The low slides northward now, begins to slow down, almost stall out here just south of Kodiak Island, but not completely stop. And the front will push in with that strong southwest wind flow right up to the coast, so gale force winds, gusts 55 miles an hour along the coast, especially on the north coast. Gales developing for the North Gulf Coast as well, with increasing rain again, moderate, maybe heavy at times showing up, and chance of some maybe heavy snow for the Klondike Highway Haines area. And snow chances increase here, south central Alaska. Probably won't see anything north of the Alaska Range there, so the Tanana Valley, as we saw, will stay dry with light winds and pretty good temperatures for this time of year. And over to the west, still some light snow at times with a trough lingering here in the western areas due to upper level southwest flow, actually with an upper level low pulling back into the Russian Far East. Widespread area of light snow and snow showers covering the Bering Sea and to a lesser extent over the Aleutians, but still look for snow showers scattered from the Alaska Peninsula all the way out to the Komodorskis. Lows tonight below zero in the Kuskokwim Valley, Copper River Basin, 30s for the Panhandle, and teens, 5 to 15, south central Alaska, mid-20s Kodiak Island. Highs tomorrow, single numbers, Kuskokwim Valley, Copper River Basin, in the 20s, south central Alaska, mid-30s Kodiak Island, and 30s to lower 40s for the southeast coast. And lows Thursday morning, again below zero, Kuskokwim Valley, Copper River Basin, in the teens, south central Alaska, mid-20s toward Homer, upper 20s northern Panhandle, mid-30s down to the south. Bristol Bay, lows 15 to 20, highs out there 25 to 32, and mid to upper 20s south central Alaska, lower 40s Kodiak Island, above zero in the Copper River Basin areas, McGrath, Nikolai, about 3, and in the 30s to mid 40s for the southeast coast. Up to the north, lows tonight anywhere from 5 to 20 below. Highs tomorrow, right around 0, maybe a little above here, central and eastern interior, staying a little below back to the west here, on up to the Arctic coast, followed by lows, again, anywhere from 5 to 20 below 0, and all the way out to the Bering Strait, staying below 0 the entire day, but milder conditions here over the central interior, talking about maybe 5 to 10 degrees at the best, at most, and then down to the southwest, lows tonight, pretty chilly there along the southwest coast, teens for the Pribilofs, near 30 for the Aleutians. Highs tomorrow, staying in the single numbers along the Kuskokwim Delta coast, Yukon Delta, lower 20s for the Pribilofs, mid-30s for the Aleutians, 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and lows the following morning, down below 0 along the southwest coast, mid-teens for the Pribilofs, 20s for the Aleutians, as well as the Alaska Peninsula, followed by highs in the lower to mid-30s for the Aleutians, and still pretty chilly along the southwest coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather now. IFR with that system down here tracking northeastward, just nudging up to the south side of the eastern Aleutians there. Marginal VFR at Island in across the Alaska Peninsula, much of the Bering Sea. Some IFR here, Nunivak Island, Yukon Delta. Also central western Arctic coast. Marginal VFR, north slope down across the Brooks Range. Band here on the lower Yukon River Valley, all of the southwest interior. A couple of patches of IFR here along the Aleutian and western Alaska ranges, and then a slice of VFR right up Cook Inlet from Fognak Island there into the central interior. Seward Peninsula, not too bad. IFR, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and much of the Panhandle. For the afternoon, marginal VFR now for the southeast coast, IFR lingering here along the North Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, including Passage Canal to Whittier, maybe even Portage. Marginal VFR, south central Alaska, VFR, north and west of the Alaska Range, and back to marginal VFR, Kobuk, Koyukuk, Yukon Flats, Brooks Range, western coast and interior, right up to the Arctic coast there. Marginal VFR covering much of the Bering Sea. Next batch IFR pushing in Shimiatu to about Kiska Island, but not quite there, otherwise marginal. And this zone of IFR now sliding northeastward, but staying along the south coast of the Alaska Peninsula, that coming right up into Kodiak Island. Next day, that continues a push northeast and hangs back here, although it drops away from the western or Alaska Peninsula, but Kodiak Island right on up into the Gulf of Alaska, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, even pushing into the northern Panhandle. Scattered marginal VFR with scattered areas of IFR in the interior, scattered IFR northern Bering Sea, but not too bad for the Arctic coast and North Slope. And for Thursday afternoon, IFR, solid IFR for the Panhandle and Gulf of Alaska, right from the Northeast Pacific there on up in across into the North Gulf Coast Range, Prince William Sound, southern Cook Inlet, as well as Kodiak Island back to Bristol Bay. Good conditions here, central interior and the Yukon River, Kuskokwim Valley, looking pretty good, mostly VFR, some marginal VFR in the Brooks Range North Slope, VFR for the Arctic coast, marginal for the back there for the Bering Sea. Anatuvik, marginal VFR tomorrow, same forecast for Adigan, Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, marginal at times for rainy and windy VFR for the most part. I think the marginal VFR will be south of the southern entrance. And for Isabel, marginal VFR at times, but Mentasta in the VFR zone. Tanita back to marginal, and Portage IFR, especially on this eastern entrance there. And for Chilkoot and White, starting out IFR, becoming marginal. Freezing levels at the surface, a little farther south now, well south of the Pribilofs, but staying north of the Aleutians, right along the Alaska Peninsula and North Gulf Coast, cutting across the northern Panhandle areas, and 2,000 feet well to the south of the entire state. And as far as icing goes, we've got some isolated moderate rime icing, could be a little bit of mixed in there too, but in across the Panhandle, back along the North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, maybe into southern Cook Inlet, but the best threat will be here to the east from about Yakutat on down, and then a little bit heavier icing, but staying south of the forecast area here, the considerable moderate and some lighter icing nudging up to the Alaska Peninsula, and that'll kind of spread northeastward later Wednesday night and into Thursday. And for the jet stream, not much of a wind flow out here over the Bering Sea, pretty light west-southwest westerlies into the southwest coast, stronger jet well to the south, and kind of coming north here and then dropping off to the southeast, 100 knots over the Queen Charlotte, 70 knots off the Panhandle coast. And at 9,000 feet, weak low here over the Copper River Basin, southwest flow 45 knots there into Canada, just clipping the northern Panhandle. Otherwise, pretty light wind flow here out over the Bering Sea, north 40 across Atka Island. 3,000 feet south or northwest, 45 knots there for the western Aleutians. Most of the winds with this system are to the south of the Alaska Peninsula there, but 40 knots creeping up towards Sitkinak Island out of the southeast. Southwest or west-southwest, 30 to 40 knots there over the eastern North Gulf Coast. Light and variable over interior Alaska. Northeast still about 40 knots over the northern Bering Sea. East 40. Eastern Arctic coast turbulence. Look for considerable moderate turbulence. North Gulf Coast. Southern Kodiak Island. Along the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians to about Adak. And after the break, I'll be back with the marine forecast.
So the sun, looking here from the ground, seems very constant and quiet. But actually, when we look at it from space, we can see it's quite turbulent and active. Space weather is activity on the sun and in a near-Earth space that can affect our technological infrastructure and society. The sun is constantly spewing out a stream of particles called the solar wind that goes out into the solar system. And it affects us here near Earth, where we're protected by a magnetic field. The interaction between the solar wind and the magnetic field can cause space weather. The Carrington event is the largest storm we've seen in recorded history when we're looking at space weather. But every solar cycle, which repeats about every 11 years, one estimate estimates that there's a 10% chance of getting a large storm like the Carrington event that could impact us here on Earth. But we see solar storms almost all the time. And these storms have an effect on our technological infrastructure. Solar storms can cause activity in Earth's atmosphere and magnetosphere that can damage electrical power grids that power our communities, interrupt radio and satellite communications, and can cause our GPS navigation to fail. NOAA is working with its international partners to ensure that we have different vantage points where we can observe space weather. Our space weather observing infrastructure from space includes the NOAA Discover satellite and the NASA ACE satellite that are stationed upstream of Earth to give us a first buoy measurement of the solar wind. It also includes the ESA-NASA SOHO satellite and the NASA Stereo satellite that image the sun and also make coronagraph measurements of the outer atmosphere of the sun, the corona, that can tell us when large explosions happen off the sun. We also observe the sun and the Earth's magnetic field from the geostationary location with NOAA's GOES. So the way we use the space weather information from satellites and from the ground is to be able to make forecasts and predictions, just like we do with hurricanes and terrestrial weather. We observe the sun and look for activity and see how it develops, and see if it's going to culminate into a large explosion that can affect us here on Earth. NOAA is working with its international partners to expand our observing capability. We're committed to observing along the sun-Earth line. So we're going to do the imaging of the sun and the upstream buoy measurements of the solar wind along the sun-Earth axis. The more we understand about the sun, the more we can prepare for it and become, just like we are a weather-ready nation, become a space weather-ready nation. And as we look forward to humans exploring out into the solar system and advancing our space commerce activities, space weather becomes more and more important.
Here at the Space Weather Prediction Center, we monitor space activity as it's occurring back at the sun, and then we issue out a forecast as well as alerts, watches, and warnings as activity is occurring. A typical space weather event would start with a solar flare back at the sun. That solar flare is short-lived and produces fairly short-lived impacts as well, basically impacting communications on the daylit side of the Earth. However, some solar flares are also associated with a coronal mass ejection or an eruption of plasma that's blasted off the sun and out into space. As forecasters, it's our job to determine if that cloud of plasma is moving towards Earth, and if it comes towards Earth, what the potential impacts may be. Those impacts can range from a fairly low-level storm that may produce the aurora a little bit farther south than usual, or can range up into fairly significant magnetic disturbances that don't happen very often, but when they do, they can impact technologies and infrastructure here on Earth. We provide information to lots of different user groups, from airlines to the electric power grid to emergency managers, aviation, satellite community, lots of different customers.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Moving into the marine forecast here for tomorrow. Not bad here along the south coast. Out of the west for the winds at about 15 to 20 knots, these at about 11 feet. A little windier up here on the north coast, but still not too bad. South to southwest, 20 to 25 knots. And for the inside waters, from Dixon Entrance all the way up to Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, mostly southeast winds of 15 knots with 3-foot seas, except up to 8 feet there for Clarence Strait. And taking a look at Thursday, increasing winds, gales coming into the coast as that next front pushes up to the northeast. We'll see south coast, south winds 30 to 35 knots, these around 20 feet, and gale warnings for the north coast, south winds 35 to 40 knots with seas up to 20 feet as well. Gale warnings for Clarence Strait, southeast winds 35 knots, Stevens Passage southeast at 25, Lynn Canal south winds 15 knots with 3-foot seas. Prince William Sound for Wednesday, northeast winds at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. And for the North Gulf Coast, northeast winds at 30 knots, northeast 25 for the western North Gulf Coast, and then westerlies at 20 to 25 knots here for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, and Cook Inlet, variable to north winds at 15 knots. And moving on to the day Thursday, Kamishak Bay, northeast winds 35 knots, Cook Inlet, small craft advisories, north to northeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast, southeast winds increasing to 30 knots. And gale warnings for the eastern North Gulf Coast, south to southeast winds 40 knots. Prince William Sound, small craft advisories for east winds at 30 knots, and those seas up to about 6 feet. And for Kodiak Island tomorrow, west to southwest winds 20 to 25 knots, 4 to 10-foot seas. Bristol Bay, east winds at 20 knots, and gale warnings there with that due to that system down to the south. So east winds 35 knots there, south side of the Alaska Peninsula, variable at 25 for the Bering Sea side. And then for the day Thursday, northwest winds blowing across the Alaska Peninsula, bringing cold air back to the south and southeast at 25 knots, northwest 25 for Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island. South winds at 20 knots, but northeast at 25 in Shelikof Strait. Fox Islands, gale warnings. North to northeast winds, 25 to 40 knots tomorrow. North 25 to 35 knots for the central Aleutians, northwest and west-northwest at 30 knots for the western areas. And then for Thursday, west-southwest winds, western Aleutians 30 knots, westerlies of 15 knots there for the central Aleutians, Fox Islands, looking at north to northwest winds, 15 to 25 knots. And for the southwest coast here, Kuskokwim Delta Coast, northeast at 20, 25 knot winds, Yukon Delta Coast, St. Lawrence Island, and northeast at 25 knots for the St. Matthew Island area. Pribilof's looking at north winds at 20 knots. For the day Thursday, Pribilof Islands, north winds 20 knots, northwest at 20 for St. Matthew Island, southwest coast, northwest 20 to 25 knots, north at 20 for St. Lawrence Island, and 15 knots for Norton Sound out of the north. And for the Chukchi Sea, west winds 20 knots, western Arctic coast, Bruce wind advisories, east winds at 30 knots, 25 knot northeast winds on the central coast, and northeast at 20 there for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And for the day Thursday, we've got lighter winds here on the east side, north to northeast at 10 knots, about 20 knots from the northeast on the central coast, and still looking at Bruce wind advisories here for the western Arctic coast, northeast winds at 25 knots. Northwest at 15 for the Chukchi Sea. And for tonight again, let's see, we've got this weakening system, keeps it wet over the panhandle, but rainfall amounts will probably diminish here, especially in the south, and then maybe pick up a little. Still a snow advisory for Klondike Highway till 9 p.m. Winter weather advisory until 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon for the western Arctic coast. Areas of light snow over the western and eastern interior. This system tomorrow begins to bring increasing snow and wind to the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, eventually into Kodiak Island. Still a weak low off the southeast coast there. That'll swing another trough in for some periods of rain or rain and snow, with the snow at the higher elevations. Not much change over the interior, dry over southern Alaska. Then a better chance of snow comes across southern Alaska, south of the Alaska Range, maybe the Copper River Basin, nothing in the eastern interior areas. Snow for the Alaska Peninsula, gale force winds and rain back into the panhandle on Thursday, and no change really out west here. Snow showers pretty widespread.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.